Chairman, dear friends, the outgoing and incoming presidents, Mr. Zucker, the dynamic chairman of the Israel Committee. I bring to you greetings from Jerusalem, city of eternity, now reunited, Yerushalayim, shechubra la yachdav, she'osa kol Yisrael chaverim, Jerusalem reunited, which in the words of the Jerusalem Talmud makes the whole of Israel comrades united in a new intimacy of spiritual value, of historical continuity, of a new involvement of Jewish destiny in terms of the past, the present, and the future. For close to 2,000 years, Jews counted in the past and prayed for the future in vision and hope. The present for them was but the inn for the night, something temporary, always on the brink, with no inner meaning, a gap, a lacuna of life hanging in limbo between past and future. With the rise of the State of Israel, but even more with the reunification of Jerusalem, past, present, and future have become fused, and we count now in the present, relating it in historical continuity to the past as it projects into the future. The entire span of Jewish history, its figures, its message, its tenets, Torah shebiktav, Torah shebal peh, the great masters of the law down the ages, the heroes of Jewish spirit, those who survived in the ghettos, in the cave societies, in the remote wildernesses, all this panorama of survival, which seemed to have little meaning down the ages, has now come to life with a vibrancy, with a force probably unprecedented since the days of the Second Jewish Commonwealth close to 2,000 years ago. And with it, Jewry has assumed a new continuity and a new future. And the question presents itself, is there any movement in the Middle East for acceptance of Israel? Has anything changed over the past 2.5 years? Is this curtain, this miasma of hatred, of ignorance, of hostility, is there any dent? Is there any hope of a breakthrough? Is there any direction, any future, any coexistence? Or is the area to be destined to constant tension and war for who knows how long? It is our contention that time has not worked against peace, that there is a continuing evolution even in the minds of our neighbors, even those who claim total intransigence. They cannot deny any longer the fact of Israel's permanence in the Middle East. They can refuse to make peace with her, but there is a certain element of movement there which can be discerned by close analysis of the position in the area. We feel that the past 2.5 years, with Israel holding the ceasefire lines impregnable against serious assault, with Israel maintaining her economic and social advancement, with Israel managing to initiate the beginnings of a communication, of a dialogue with the Arabs of the territories, these 2.5 years have not been in vain. This new strength which we have found, this new confidence, the ceasefire lines as they stand there strategically assuring our defense, have not been without impact on the Arab mind. For Arab leadership faces a threefold dilemma: either to stand still and await the attendant internal instability, to wage war, the results of which are a foregone conclusion, or to move to this leap forward towards peace in the Middle East, towards a new epoch of cooperation and peace. It is our feeling that the dilemma in the Arab mind deepens as each month passes and as the years unfold. For 20 years, Israel alone had the dilemma of the future. While with the Arab leaders, the assessments were clear that this society, which they conceived to be a chance, a casual assembly of refugees from Nazi persecution, from oppression, Middle Eastern countries, a flotsam and jetsam of refugees cast together by imperialist intrigue and by Jewish support. This amalgam, they felt, had no validity, had no history, had no roots, was essentially alien to the Middle Eastern area, which they considered to be a totally Arab area. This was their assessment, and they believed that either economically or under social strains or under the erosion of diaspora and Israel relationship, or under the impact of Arab unity and technology and pressures of tens of millions of people, that Israel must collapse from within. Indeed, their leaders, only some months before the '67 war, believed that Israel would be washed away by the sands of time without even the need for an assault on a military scale. Now, these assessments, they have been washed away by the sands of time. And over the past 2.5 years, another series of assessments that Israel could not hold her ceasefire lines, could not maintain her reserve forces against the growing strength of the Arab armies, that the population, Arab population, the territories would not yield, would not agree in any harmony or coexistence, that the Fatah thesis and doctrine would entirely poison their minds and disrupt Israel from within, that Israel's economic and social progress would be impeded, that internationally more and more pressures of great power involvement might endanger the peace of the area. All these assessments, too, do not seem to have been borne out by events. The situation in the Middle East remains serious. One can never discount war as a possibility, maybe as an act of despair, but to the best of our understanding, any conception in Arab capitals from the summer of '68 till the summer of '69 of some large-scale action, these ideas have been put aside in view of the very effective defense we showed in face of Egyptian artillery, barrages, and in the air conflicts from March till September. And thus the Middle East at the moment, with all the frontier tension, with all the pressures, I would say is in for a considerable period of no war, no peace, a war of attrition, while each people faces the other across the ceasefire lines laden with tension. But, and this I believe one can glean from the area, from a study of its capitals and its leaders and their thoughts, it is no longer a case of an iron curtain sealing off totally the mind of one people from the other. It is no longer the situation which prevailed over 20 years. There is an intuitive dialogue. There is a sense of communication. Maybe for the first time, over 50 years of Zionism, over 22 years of the State of Israel, for the first time, each people is beginning to realize some element of the historical dimensions of each other. Maybe some Arab leaders and certainly intellectuals for the first time are beginning to realize that we are not alien to the area, that we are at home, that we are rooted in our homeland, that this phenomenal link of close to 2,000 years has been reaffirmed. Let us not easily carpet their misunderstanding over decades, for so many even among us did not grasp the nature of this return, of this restoration, without precedent in human annals, and yet vibrant and alive in 20th century terms, with all its background and canvas across the annals of man of recorded history. So maybe there is a movement there. We do not want to be too optimistic, but we do not believe that many Arab leaders consider today that Israel can be thrown into the sea, as they preach themselves and their peoples for over 20 years. We do not believe that they can sincerely, in their inner mind, look upon us as some casual happening, They surely cannot ignore the inner nature of this society, its regaining of its roots, its new sense of history, its background, this phenomenal unity of tribes of people gathered from close to 70 lands, of differing cultures and climate and thought, but yet united in Jewish eternity and this sense of a renewed common nationhood. So surely let us not be too pessimistic. Let us not see the Middle East as an endless morass, as an area designed to fatalism without cessation, with no hope, with no prospect. We may be totally wrong in that. So there are movements of thought. Those who follow closely Middle Eastern scene feel them. And we too, I would say, maybe for the first time are realizing the nature of Arab fatalism. What we face today essentially is a test between Jewish faith and Arab fatalism. It is a test of morale. It is the capacity to withstand time. We have to stand firm until the Arab peoples will realize that any analogy with the confrontation between Arab and Western civilization has no relevance whatsoever. They are dealing with a people whose life, whose perennial revival, whose religious contribution, whose Chaye Olam, whose restoration to Zion, L'Shivat Zion, a people linked with Jerusalem through recorded history, a people whose very nature, indeed justification of the human scene, is its timeless capacity. And surely as this message seeps in, and it must as time unfolds, let us have hope that the bridges now being formed intuitively, despite the tension, despite the ceaseless hatred and propaganda barrage, the meeting on the Western Bank and the Gaza Strip with 1 million Arabs, the tens of thousands who come back and forth from Arab countries, the doubts, the hesitations in Arab councils, the questionings as to the future, surely even fatalism must yield dents at some point. But in order to achieve that, we must show our capacity to stand firm in the cause of peace. We have many dialogues. Our first and foremost is the intuitive dialogue with the Arab peoples I've mentioned, which continues day in, day out. And let us not pay too much attention to the immediate events of the day, no matter how somber or painful they may be. B'damaya chayi, in our blood have we lived down the ages, in our blood we rise to life now. And as we mourn the young who give their lives on the canal and the Golan Heights, the Jordan Valley, we are mourning those who are laying foundations for ultimate Jewish redemption. For close to 2,000 years, Jews who gave their lives never had that sense of privilege. And so, let us never forget that the dialogue continues intuitively across the frontiers. Never again can the Iron Curtain seal off the minds. Never can it quench the ferment of thought. There is a movement. There is a non-word search. There are doubts, there are hesitations, and therefore there is hope. And let us live in our faith and hope, and let the future unfold. For the question often posed across world Jewry, Ma Yasaf, what will be the end? This surely is alien to Jewish faith and thought, has no relevance to our people in terms of its essential nature, its survival down the ages, and indeed its essential contribution to world civilization. There are other rims of dialogue in this situation, not only with the Arab peoples. There are those with our friends in Western capitals on the nature of the peace. This basic agreement, there can be no withdrawal without peace. But our insistence that peace must be a total one, a final liquidation of the Arab-Israel conflict. No more escape clauses which will permit the Oriental imagery of the Arab mind to find excuses once again to withdraw from international undertakings and signatures provided with all due sanction and then scattered away in the winds of the emotions of the East. We insist that this time we shall not budge until there is a total assured peace such as prevails between nations at peace across the world. Whatever the sacrifice, whatever the burden, we will not cast away this historic opportunity for a breakthrough to new uplands of hope and regional cooperation. There can be no half solutions this time, no pseudo-settlements, no assurances to be cast away, but binding understandings enshrined in peace treaties, with all the educational impact this will have on the masses of Arab countries, with all the hope that this somehow will purge certain elements of that poisonous propaganda which has been given them over 20 years. We don't expect that tomorrow, but we believe if we stand firm, the dilemma will deepen in the Arab mind. How long can they continue in a situation of no peace, no war? As long as they can continue, we can continue. But for the first time, both peoples are linked in a common dilemma into the future. And here lies the hope. For the first time, both sides, equally in dilemma, must ultimately together find a meeting point in terms of the future of the region to which both belong. There are other areas of dialogue. The Middle East is today a focal point, whether you move in Peking, Moscow relations, or Moscow, Bucharest, or the neutralist bloc, or Washington, Moscow. Wherever you turn, the Middle East today is a crucial factor for the peace of the area and probably for much broader significance in terms of world peace and cooperation. And again, on the spiritual plane, there are new channels of communication which none dreamt of or could dream of in our time until they took place. There is Jerusalem sacred to three religions, again a bridge of understanding, and we are happy to notice that many Christian circles are developing with us relations of understanding and harmony. We seek agreements with them to assure the religious status and universal character of those places sacred to Christendom, and similarly with Islam. But across the world of the spirit, across the world of philosophy and of thought, this phenomenon of Jerusalem reunited, of the return of the Jew to Jerusalem in our time, this phenomenon of a people having marched within 25 years from the abyss of despair to the uplands of hope, a people 25 years ago, its sons and daughters being sent in unparalleled cruelty by the millions to the gas chambers, and today under the grace of providence, Hashgachat Hashem, today to be a prime force in the destinies of the Middle East. What a passage, what a transition, what a leap forward, and what endless ripples of thought and meaning and significance and dialogue unfold. How can one, against such a background, ask, Ma Yasaf, what will be the end? Did anybody ask this 30 years ago and know the answer, or 20 or 10, or even in those crucial, perilous weeks before June the 5th, 1967, when Israel, her fortunes, her focal point, her center, her hope, the whole balance of Jewish destiny lay in crucial balance. So therefore, let us, in the light of this experience, retain and deepen our faith and unity into the future. For indeed, as we do so, we gain a deeper and deeper insight into the very roots of our background, of our people's history. For Jews, as you know, have a unique character of what I would call not only an historical memory, but a meta-identification. generation by generation. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Bar Kokhba are not remote historical figures to the people of Israel today. If they were to rise from their graves, it was as if they had never died. B'chayehem, b'mitatam nikraim chayim. And in the consciousness of our people, the whole story of exile is constricted. And we are back linked across the entire span of history in a unity which no generation surely since the Second Temple period could envisage, far short even of feeling. And in this sense, things unfold. I was asked only some months ago by a historian who was writing up great events in history, and he said he was asked to describe, to put in the destruction of the Jewish temple. He didn't think it was a world event of major importance, for at that time it is true that 3 legions of Rome had to be sent, more than the regular 2 for such a force to overwhelm the last embers of Jewish resistance. But after all, in terms of the Roman Empire, the destruction of the Jewish temple was but a very small event, for the legions of Rome were engaged across the Europe we know, from England down to North Africa and to the Persian Gulf. What, he said, this historian, meant the Second Temple destruction in world terms. How then can I yield to the advice of my Jewish friends that in drawing up a book on major events of human history for adolescents and schools in Europe, how can I, on touching on the Jewish issue, put in the destruction of the Second Temple? I told him, indeed, you are right extraneously, and you are certainly right until the past decade or 2. But today, with a Jerusalem reunited, where great theologians and thinkers of other faiths ponder the mystery, as they themselves describe it, of the revival of a people and its return to the 2 square kilometers, which have enlivened and inspired the soul of mankind down the ages. This city, which draws the attention of hundreds and hundreds of millions, now linked again with a people which has found itself, which searches anew for its roots against the background of the eternity of this city. I asked him, how on earth can you understand this without understanding, without describing the background of destruction, the sense of exile, the shchinte begaluta, the search for self, the loneliness of a soul of a people over close to 2,000 years, that loneliness which has now been expurged, even as Nehemiah said to the king of the Persians when he asked him 2,500 years ago, Madua panecha ra'im, wherefore is your countenance fallen? And Nehemiah answered him, Madua lo yera'u panai, wherefore should my countenance not be fallen? Keshair beit kivrot avotai chareva, when the city of Jerusalem, the graveyard of my fathers, is destroyed, and he has to rebuild it. And thus the concept of lack of mirth, of joy, the joylessness of a Jew in exile was linked with Jerusalem. And today this has come back, and the whole perspective of homeland and exile, of Jerusalem and diaspora, of past, present, and future, all assume new proportions in the canvas of our perspective. Surely this is a message with which Jews, no matter how remote from the fold, live with day in, day out. Surely this has a significance in world history which only maybe over time will unfold. but surely we must feel this privilege of being part of a new epoch of Jewish history, the like of which our fathers could only pray for, but could hardly dream it as a reality. And here we are united across the world, and with Jews everywhere there is this new dimension of unity. This ancient midrash, Avraham ha'ivri, Avraham me'ever mizeh, v'chol ha'olam me'ever mizeh. Abraham on one side and all the world on the other, as this unity deepens into the future. Against this background, against this experience, wherefore do so many of our fellow Jews ask the question, Ma yeh hasof? Where even apart from fate is their logic? Where is their sense of the current of history? Where is their grasp of events? Why do they not realize the significance of this balance of forces maintained in the Middle East, of this phenomenal spiritual dialogue unfolding around Jerusalem, of all this means in blocking Jewish assimilation? Let us then be happy with our lot. Let us who have seen with our eyes in this generation the destruction of 6 million of our people, and been vouchsafed to see Atchalta de Gula, the beginnings of redemption, the first stirrings of a new unfolding landscape of Jewish experience. Let us feel it day in, day out in faith and prayer. Let us feel it in action. Let us feel it in unity. And let us feel it in total confidence that in strength, in unity, we will come through to peace. Ulegulat Yisrael Hashlema.
We will all agree that this was a most eloquent and beautiful inaugural address. Before going on to make the remarks which I want to share with you tonight, let me add a word of thanks on behalf of the United Synagogue and the whole movement to Dr. Bernard Siegel, the Executive Director of the United Synagogue, and his devoted associates. They are the men, and Mrs. Gilead and her associates, the women, who keep our movement alive and who see to it that our movement should go forward under the direction of our elected volunteer service. And so I want to congratulate Dr. Bernard Siegel and his associates for their achievement. I hope they will go from strength to strength. Dear friends, to try to understand the problems of Judaism and the Jewish people in our time, it is helpful to think of them in the perspective of the long history of our tradition and our faith. And it seems to me even more helpful to think of them in the far longer perspectives of biological eras. Man is, of course, first uniquely endowed with his mind, with his brain, which has no parallel in any other living species. But some of my biologist friends tell me that the brain is remarkable and indeed unique, not only in its essence, but in its very rapid evolutionary development. They tell me that there has been no other example in all evolution of an organ such as the brain developing as rapidly as the human brain has in so short a biological time as 500,000 years. When we compare the brain of our primitive ancestors who lived 500,000 years ago with that which any one of us has, the differences become immense. And while man's brain has not changed over the last 25 or 50,000 years, it has changed immensely in 500,000 years. And one asks oneself, how did this happen? Why did the human brain become what it has become? The answer is that this is part of the law of natural selection. It happens that man is one of the most weak of all animal species, that left to himself, he would be quickly a prey to his enemies or be destroyed by his environment, and that only those of our ancestors, those primitive anthropoids who had this peculiar quality of brain in early form, could survive. And so it has happened that over the centuries and over the millennia, and indeed over hundreds of millennia, there has gone on a screening process by which all the weaker brothers who did not have the resources, the intellectual resources, the intellectual resourcefulness, the tool-making ability by which they could save themselves from hostile forces, by which they could protect themselves from their enemies, by which they could conquer other enemies, survived. Our very weakness thus became the source of our strength. In the brain, there are several parts. The part that we're talking about now is the large forebrain. The older brain we share with many other animals, and that is the seat of the emotions. It is natural that having this power, having this organ, man should have great resourcefulness, have developed great skill, developed great cleverness in beating down hostile forces and in conquering nature. And that is what we have succeeded in doing. Beginning with the first little bit of flint tool to the hydrogen bomb of our time, man has always made newer and newer instruments through which he could protect himself and ultimately bring about get himself the conquest of the world. From being the weakest of all animal species, he has become the master of the world itself. From time to time, however, there have arisen some individuals, like the philosophers in Greece and the prophets of Israel and the moral leaders of other people, who somehow seem to me to perhaps be the prototypes of a new type of man, but in any event were different from most other people. In this way, that while for most people resourcefulness, cleverness, and cunning was enough, it saved them from destruction. But once in a while there were people like the prophets and the philosophers who were unhappy about all this, who wanted to find out what is all this about, whose intellectual powers did not end simply with surviving, but wanted to know survival for what? In other words, were worrying not how to keep life going, but what is life for? They were unusual people. And most of them, like the Greek philosophers, wrote books, taught pupils, but had really very little influence on future generations except an abstract thought. One group, the prophets of Israel, had a more profound influence on the world. And they had this more profound influence because they created not only books, but a people and a movement. They created a series of ideas, translated the words which other teachers used and their maxims into a way of life by which all of us can live. And so translated into a way of life, suddenly this notion of survival becomes secondary to the wisdom, seeing beyond survival. What are we surviving for? And what will we achieve with our survival? Everywhere else, throughout the world, the history of mankind has been a history of short-range victories and never of long-range victories. Men have won many wars, but never has anybody won any peace. The Roman Empire was led by great people, and they extended the limits of their empire further and further in their hope that they might protect first the state itself and then its conquests. But the end of it all was that they had extended it so far that it was overextended. And the last analysis, they could not defend their very borders against the savages whom they themselves had armed. In our own time, at least in my lifetime, we have seen 2 world wars. Great Britain entered both of them and came out victorious from both of them. It entered the First World War because it could not bear the thought of having the Channel ports in the hand of some great power which might be hostile to it. It entered the Second World War for the same reason, and also because it was necessary for it to prevent the Germans from conquering the world, and because it wanted to protect its empire. Well, after 50 years, it seems strange that it makes very little difference whether the channel ports are in the hands of a weak power or a strong power, because the future of Great Britain does not depend anymore on channel ports and invading army, but on hostile missiles and hydrogen bomb warfare. And so it might have just as well have saved itself those two wars. And the hundreds of thousands of people, indeed millions of people, who were killed in them. Its empire is gone. We too entered both wars. And we too have won victories in both wars. But in 1917, we could not foresee that our victory over Germany would produce Hitler. And that the result of all of it would be that we'd be in worse trouble in 1969 than we ever could have been in 1917, even if the Germans had won the war. That is because we are cunning, we are clever, we are resourceful, we know how to win wars, we know how to win short-range goals, but the long-range goals of trying to get peace in the world, of trying to produce a better world, continually elude us. And that is what the prophets of Israel, the philosophers of Greece, were so sensitive to. Now there is this group of people, you and I, who are descendants and kinsmen and disciples of the prophets, have been taught how to translate their notions, not simply into words, but into behavior, into actions of life. There is such a thing as a Jewish gentleman. We often hear the expression, a Christian gentleman, but there is such a thing as a Jewish gentleman. A Jewish gentleman need not necessarily know the Western habit that when a lady comes into the room where you are sitting, you stand up. Because in many Jewish communities, one never heard of that custom. Certainly it was unknown in Eastern Europe, where my parents were born. And I must say I remember very well when I first learned it. A Jewish gentleman may have been, if he lived in Eastern Europe, very poor. And he might not have had nicely prepared clothing. In fact, he might have worn the same clothing for many years, and his suit might have been shiny, and his hat might have been battered. His face would be clean, his hands would be clean, but his beard might be long. Solomon Schechter was such a Jewish gentleman. His suit was very nice, he was very nicely dressed, but he had a nice long beard. And when he used to go into a restaurant, he'd say, "I'd like to have 3 eggs, 1 for my beard." Well, that did not prevent him from being a Jewish gentleman. A Jewish gentleman is described in a book which has just been translated into English by one of our colleagues who may be in this very room now, Rabbi Seymour J. Cohn of Chicago. And I happened to be glancing through the book. My eye was taken by a sentence there. This Toho Sadikim, written in the 15th century, says that if a man is prone to anger, it's a good habit to learn to be quiet when he feels anger coming on him. It's also good for him to learn to talk in a low voice, because then his anger will not be as furious as if he habitually talks in a loud voice, and if he were said anything in anger. Now that's good advice, and the author might just as well have been a modern psychiatrist like Freud. I know a man who's a contributor to the seminary, a very lavish contributor to the seminary. He's told the story himself. Now, I could mention his name if I wanted to, but perhaps not. Who once remarked that he and his wife never had a quarrel in all their life. He said, that's not because we are different from all other married couples, but because when we were married, I made up my mind that there will be some tensions in the house, and that whenever I saw one coming, I would take a walk. He said, I've had a lot of exercise. He has had a lot of exercise, but no quarrels. Well, these little things seem like nothing, but they are important. And when you write a whole Shulchan Aruch and a Talmud about them, they give you a way of life as our ancestors lived it. And so if you came to Lithuania, or some parts of Poland, or some parts of Hungary, and you met a Jewish community, you came across a community which I would call a community of saints. We have lost some of that, as everybody else has lost a great deal of it. We become assimilated to the world, and we become much more interested in immediate success than we are in the things that are make life worth living and make success worth having. The fact that we learned the words that the prophets taught us does not prevent us from repeating them. On the contrary, it encourages us to repeat them. And so we repeat the words we learned from the prophets and the rabbis. But our actions do not always conform to our words. And here is the great tragedy of our time. For our children, notice the immense gap, not between us and them, but between our words and our action, between what we say and what we do. And this tremendous gap is confusing to a young child. It is easy for me in my 70s, comparatively easy, not altogether easy, but comparatively easy, to think of a world in which there are weapons like the hydrogen bomb, in which man's resourcefulness is resulting in the pollution of the oceans and the waters of the world, in the pollution of the very atmosphere of the world, in the pollution of the food we eat, and endangering not only our lives, but life itself, simply because we cannot think ahead. But suppose I was not 70, more than 70, but suppose I was 19, and suppose I didn't have to worry about my grandchildren, but I had to think of myself living for the next 50 years with a sword of Damocles hanging over me. Perhaps in my time there will be a madman like Hitler running an empire, or another madman like Stalin running another empire. For there were two madmen running two empires in our lifetime. And if our child says to himself, what am I going to do in this world? And all he can hear from us is not pious action, but pious words. All he can see in us is not a Jewish gentleman, but a gentleman. He is terrified because the rock to which he is attached turns to sand. That is the tragedy of our people, that a great moment has come for us, and it finds, as Herzog said, a small people. A great moment has come when the world is yearning for the moral and spiritual leadership, that a people had to learn wisdom, for without wisdom it would have perished. For all those in all the ages, since we left Israel, left the land of Israel, in all these centuries, all those who lacked the wisdom that the prophets taught us disappeared from us. We are only the remnant saved, the children of those who saw that it was better to suffer persecution and ignominy and humiliation and to be a Jew rather than to prosper and not to be a Jew. The people who had that wisdom have remained within the fold. And alas, now we have come to an affluent world and to a free world, and this great treasure of wisdom translated into daily behavior is being eroded and is disappearing. The Jewish gentleman is disappearing. Now, in this world, it seems to me that the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, the Rabbinical Assembly of America, and above all, the United Synagogue of America, have a great job to do. It is our task now, laymen, rabbis, teachers of rabbis, to see whether we cannot reintroduce into the world the cultivated Jewish gentleman by living as one, by raising our children as such, and by serving as examples of such. In order to do so, the first requirement of all is to be at home with the great Jewish texts. That is the way our ancestors taught their children. You learn by being associated with great men, Solomon Schechter said. But the great men need not be living great men. They could be the great men translated into great books. To read Isaiah, to read Jeremiah, to read Amos, to read the Psalms, and let them enter our souls. To study the Talmud, to study the rabbinic literature, to study the life of Hillel, to study the life of Rabbi Akiva, to study the life of Reish Lakish, to study the life of Abzera, to study the life of Rashi Maimonides, is inevitably to see how one lives if one has in mind not immediate goals but long-range goals, not success but the things that make success worth having. Each of us has the task in his own home. Our new president has spoken of Jewish education, and certainly that is one of the most urgent needs of our times. And it begins the minute the baby is born. My son, who is a rabbi and who's here, I hope he won't mind my making a reference to him. When he was 3 years old or 4 years old, one of my daughters were playing ball with each other. And one of them threw the ball to one another. And he knew that he mustn't play ball outside on Shabbos, but he was too young to know that you could play ball in his bedroom on Shabbos. And when he saw the ball being thrown from one to the other, he said, "It's Shabbos." Well, a reaction of a child, a baby, to the fact that today is Shabbos and his life must be lived differently on this day than any other, did not come from any verbal teaching. That came to him from feeding Shabbos all around him from the minute he was born. Respect for learning, generosity, love of one's neighbor comes to us long before we are even articulate. So Jewish education we have to learn to make part of our very home life. And then on top of that we can build our school life. On top of that we can build our adult education. And for all this we need the work of the scholars of the seminary, the work of the rabbis of our congregation, and we need the work of all of you brothers and sisters who are members of our congregations. There is more at stake today than there ever has been before in the strengthening of Judaism as a faith. I said a moment ago that I thought the prophets and the prophets of Israel and the philosophers of the Greeks might be the prototypes of a coming man. The reason I have this hope is that because I see no future for mankind today unless the wisdom of the prophets and the sages of Israel and of the Greek philosophers, so many of whom agreed with them, itself becomes the wisdom of mankind. We have come to an age in which a wise mankind can live and a foolish mankind cannot live. And therefore the very need for survival that made the resourceful intellect so useful and so universal is now pressing upon us to make a wise intellect universal. This is our chance. This is our opportunity. And we must not let it go by. We must not lose it. It is not only our lives that are at stake. It is the lives and worthwhileness of the lives of the peoples of the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for being with us this evening. As you know, Rabbi Cohn is still attending the conference, the annual conference of the Council of the Jewish Welfare Funds and Federations, and hopefully will be back in the community tomorrow or Tuesday. And he sends his regrets that he could not be with us this evening, and particularly to introduce our guest in the opening meeting, third Sunday evening session of the Sunday Evening Culture House. Now that you know what we're doing here, we'll proceed along those lines. When this particular area, this Sunday series, we discussed the third Sunday of the month, the series to be known as This I Believe, and it was agreed that we would have rabbis from the community with whom you have not had, as a rule, an acquaintance. And Rabbi Singer told me that he had never been, in all of his years in the Chicago area, he had never been in Miami. So he, in turn, hasn't had the opportunity to meet you, at least on your home ground. When Rabbi Cohn and I were discussing those who would be invited, the first person was Rabbi Sholem Singer, and then let's see who the others will be. This past summer, Rabbi Cohn had the opportunity of meeting Rabbi Singer again many times, but in Amsterdam, on a streetcar, I think, on a trolley.
Yeah.
I think
met in a hotel.
You were after Herring or something like that.
Yeah.
And after the meeting, Rabbi Singer will tell you a certain species
really
of
the
herring.
heartburn after the herring. Yeah.
And that made quite an impression on Rabbi Cohn. Yeah. He's looking for that brand. You both had heartburn. But at any rate, it was agreed that Rabbi Singer would be the one to inaugurate and kick off this phase of the Sunday Evening Culture House series. Rabbi Singer is a native of New York, was educated, was City College?
No, Yeshiva University and then Columbia University.
Prior to that, he, however, was exposed to Masifta Torah Vadas, and they were exposed to him. And then Yeshiva, Yitzchak Kalkonen, Yeshiva University, and was ordained as a rabbi at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in New York. He served pulpits in Mount Kisco, New York, which is just north of upstate, slightly upstate of New York City, and also was an assistant rabbi at Sinai Congregation for a period of time before assuming the spiritual leadership of Congregation B'nai Torah in Highland Park. The congregation, incidentally, has, it's now about a year and a half, 2 years now that they have dedicated their new building right on the lake. It's about as far north in Highland Park as you can get without getting into government property, namely Fort Sheridan. And Rabbi Singer, I know, will extend an invitation to all of you to visit him and his congregation there, where you will receive a very warm welcome. But the purpose of our meeting this evening is to hear from Rabbi Singer, to talk with him, to hear about his philosophy, comments, opinions. Rabbi Singer has written extensively in many, many periodicals and magazines. Some of you may have read his articles, the Jewish Spectator, Reconstructionist, many others that I probably have, that I can't think of at the moment, but they're there. And now you'll... There's a third one. No. But seriously, why should I tell you about Rabbi Singer? Here he is, and he'll talk to you about his approach to Judaism, and then afterwards, be glad to exchange views and thoughts with you.
Fine. Thank you very kindly, Rabbi Mordechai Simon. Mordechai Simon is a beautiful human being. He is one of my favorite rabbis. And you know, in my industry, in my profession, we speak about who is the rabbi's rabbi. Mordechai Simon would qualify as a rabbi's rabbi. Seymour Cohen I know too well, you see. But Seymour Cohen, incidentally, I want to say a few kind things about him. His brother, Rabbi Cohen has a brother, his name is Mitchell Cohen. Mitch Cohen was my classmate at Yitzchak Elchanan. Went to the same university, same college, and so on. We graduated together, and Mitchell was my classmate. Very wonderful human being, and Mitchell was one of the great intuitive card players in the yeshiva. He used to give a von Kopf, no rummy, a knack. He used special knuckles. This is all very foreign to me. But fantastic chush. We used to call it a gefühl. A gefühl. It's like a fine jeweler. Well, let me, before we get into the orchestrated tzaras for the evening, and that is, of course, you know, what a rabbi thinks about all day long, and we should maybe be a little happy for a little while before I go into the Kaddish. I've had some wonderful brushes with this congregation, doings. I live up in Highland Park, and Solomon Goldman, Olav Shalom, had the house up in Libertyville. Periodically, I would pay a pilgrimage to that house. Had one of the finest libraries, Judaica, Hebraica libraries, to be found anywhere. And at one time, although I'm told it's been done, at one time I and a colleague thought of writing the biography of Solomon Goldman. Nobody has ever written the biography of Solomon Goldman. I don't know if you're aware of it. And I understand that it's being done. Am I correct? Maurice Samuel, with someone else, is apparently involved in it. Do you know anything about that?
So I've heard.
That's what I've heard, to that effect. But the congregation, I think, I think the congregation owes it to the memory of this giant, unquestionably a giant in Jewish life. They owe it to him to subsidize some young writer as an individual would commission a great work. If it weren't for individuals commissioning works, we'd have never had the works today of men like whom? Like the Bachs and the Mozarts and so on and so on and so forth. These works were commissioned. Years ago within our tradition, a man would commission, whether it was an Ibn Ezra or somebody else, to write some beautiful poetry in honor of a bar mitzvah, honor of a wedding. What's happened to this? Today our poets have to suffer. Don't even have any poets. They go to the Goyim. The Goyim will take care of them. They'll publish them and so on. We're interested in other things, far more important things. Band of the Year Man, I suppose, things of this sort. Well, that's important. Of course, there are other things that are very important. Social action, So. They made me watchman of the vineyards. Notati shebeneta kromim, but karmi shalilonatati. But my own vineyard I did not plant. The story of Jewish life, dear children, boys and girls. Story of Jewish life, this is how to make friends. See, immediately make friends. The story of Jewish life really in America is the story of going from crisis, people leaving the old country, coming here, having to transfer all of their institutions to this country, so they go through a period of building, and just the story of Thanksgiving that we're going to come into. Very shortly, Thanksgiving. And they have to build, and they have to survive and live through all of the tzaris and the exposure to the elements and all of the emergencies and the hazards, etc., of what it means to strike roots in a new atmosphere, a new environment, a new country. And this has been the life of the Jew here. Then, of course, after a while, when you settle, like somebody once said, this is important, and maybe it'll give us the key to what's going on. They once asked Rav Kook, many, many years ago, when the Jews were pioneers, first coming, converting Tel Aviv from sand into buildings. Literally, all they had there was a dune. They had to convert it into buildings and homes and, of course, schools and so on. Somebody said to them, the Yidden hitten nicht auf Shabbos. They're not too observant. And perhaps we should think twice about sustaining them and supporting, strengthening their arms, and especially you, Rabbi Kook, as a frume, a tzaddik. You probably will be very sympathetic to this, Why have a land, if they're not going to have Shmira Shabbos and Kashrus and Mikveh, Taras HaMishpacha? Do we have to translate all the Latin here? No.
Here and there.
Here and there. He said to them, he said, dear children, he said, I can tell you this. When you read the Bible, it says, Bereshis Bora. In the beginning there was creation. Then it says, Elohim. Then God. Passage reads, Bereshis Bora Elohim. In the beginning there was creativity, there was action, there was building, etc. Later on, after that, came in Elohim. The godliness and the piety and the orthodoxy and the punctilia, you see, of Taras HaMishpacha and mikveh and oversized tzitzis and delicious little kippot, that comes later. So he was quite tolerant of those, you see, who were building, although not building, out of real yirah shamayim, fear of the Lord. They weren't building with their tzitzis on and with their kitlach, but they were building. And he said later on the next generation will bring in Elokis, or the Elokut. They'll bring in a little Getlichkeit, a little Frumkeit and religiosity and so on. Now, I would say this to you. American Jewish history has essentially been that. We were very tolerant. And Rabbi Simon and myself were speaking about it just this evening as we come up. That's what rabbis speak about. We speak about Jews, our flock. And we've had a period of Bereshis Bora. In the beginning there was creativity. And all of the powerful, rich, wealthy, aggressive, dynamic, pushing, thrusting, Promethean, voluntative, energetic Jews, they came to the fore. Unsere gewaltige Jiden, powerful Jews. They came to the fore, and these were the men who structured Jewish life, They set up this and they said that, like the shul president who said, Shakespeare gesagt to be or not to be, I say to be. You see. Now, we're coming to a point in Jewish life of Elohim. Bara, fine, you've created synagogues, you've created this, you've created, now we want Elohim. You've given us the quantity, the thing, now we want the quality. We want the content. We want its essence. We have not delivered on that. We have not delivered on that. This is the crisis today in Jewish life. This is the crisis. And I would say to you this. It was the great Ernest Renan, a great church historian, a man who was interested in early church history and so on and so forth. He once said, the thing that repelled me from Christianity was not its theology, but its history. The theology I found attractive. Its history I found repulsive, repugnant. I paraphrase this for you tonight, and I put down a little note to myself, and I said, what is repelling our Jewish children today from the synagogue is not its theology, but its sociology. What is repelling young people from Jewish life today is the sociology, the Marjorie Morningstars, the Patimkins, the Epsteins from Goodbye Columbus, who say to be or not to be, I say to be. They are repelled by Jewish sociology. The leadership today within Jewish life is in the hands of, as we say, all-rightniks, powerful, Promethean, prestigious Jews who know, as we say, the cost of everything, but the value of very little. These Jews are costing us enormous, enormous sums. They are costing us our young people. They're costing us that in terms of the priorities that they've set up all along. And we have occasion to speak about it. There's a desperate need today for Jewish enlightenment. Our young people want to find the values of Judaism. They really want to find their faith. I've often said this might be a godless generation, the young people, but they are by no means an irreligious generation. They are godless but not irreligious. As a matter of fact, they have more faith. Just give a cook the way they run after Mr. G. McCarthy and Mr. George McGibbon, and after they hear us. They want to believe, and the Kennedy boys. They want to believe desperately. They'll latch on to any coattail. Irreligious, the last thing in the world. Faithless, the last thing in the world. They are looking for guideposts, whether those guideposts be embodied in humans or in the values of an ancient tradition, culture, and what have you. We cannot deliver on it. We simply don't have, in terms of the people who are structuring Jewish life, in terms of the people who are calling to be or not to be, in terms of the way they've set up the priorities, our children are going to be shortchanged. There's no question about it. And they are being shortchanged. I say again, it is the sociology in Jewish life today. We speak about federation downtown, made up of powerful, rich, reiche, prestigious Jews. They know the plastic business inside out. They know the junk business inside out. Clocks and suits inside out. They buy them by the carload. They know nothing about young people. They know nothing about the problems within education, the disaffection on the part of young people with faith, with folk, with literature, with the common fate of Israel. People, our whole people in general. They know very little about the solutions that have to be brought to these problems. How you bring young people, as a matter of fact, you constantly hear, you know, all rabbis have to sit through this. You listen to a man who sells, what should we say, he sells junk all day long. He tells you how to bring the youth into the temple. The guy wouldn't even prescribe for his daughter. He wouldn't prescribe anything for a cold. He'd run out and call the doctor. But how to solve the whole Jewish problem? Das ist a kniak. To be, I say. That's it. And he's got proof. He's chairman of the committee. What else? Chairman of the committee. So the situation is, and the other thing is, there are many, many problems. So the situation is that a man who really is involved in temple as an avocation, you see, everyone plays at temple on the weekend. All week long, he's in the cloak and suit business, or he's selling insurance, or Gutweiswas, he's filling tea. On the weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, he comes to the shul, looks at the books, examines, goes to the classes, kid, cook, committees. Like I said to someone, their play is my life. Their Spielchel, you hear, is my career. Something's wrong. Something is wrong. If another man's hobby, you hear, one man's hobby is my life's career, my dedication, mein Kishkes, mein Neshama, mein Herz, mein Leben und Leben. Leben und Leben. And the people who really make this as an avocation, they call the shots. The destiny of the Jews today are being solved. It's being structured. It's being structured by people in leisure time. People who have an extra couple of minutes for a federation meeting. What's it does? We cook zusammen, we stack for corned beef sandwiches. That's it. How would you like to be a doctor? The doctor, really full-time, he works in the stock market. On the weekend, he takes out appendix. Or he does hysterectomies. Ashena Leben. This is the state of Jewish life today, believe it or not. It is precisely that. The formula is very simple. See, Catholics don't allow it. Catholics have a very simple formula. The faith will be administered by the faithful. You don't practice medicine in this town here without a medical degree. Tragedy in Jewish life, for the most part, is what Rabbi Simon was saying tonight. The faith, our faith, is being administered by the faithless. Jews who couldn't get further from Jewish life. They can't get far enough from Jewish life. They collect millions and millions of dollars from synagogues and synagogues to give it precisely to non-Jewish organizations. Deliberately to non-Jewish organizations. Why? They would love to see the death of Judaism, bichlal. Consciously or unconsciously. Hopefully not consciously. Subconsciously. They bury the money in everything else other than Jewish. I once sat in Geneva, Switzerland, with a man. As you probably know, the world headquarters for Hayas and so on is in Geneva. What's a big term for it? Joint distribution, JDS, and so on, is in Geneva. Yeah. This man that came in to allocate hundreds of millions of dollars, he was schlepped in from some other organization. What was his qualification for the job? He had some kind of advanced work in social service. He was working, I think before that, he was working in Upper Nyassa land with Zulus. Maybe Jewish Zulus. And he asks me, they received a request from the Lubavitcher, who were running yeshivas in North Africa. He asks me, do you think it's something that we should really support? Is it worthwhile helping it survive? He's telling me that he really has life and death over it. So I had to go explain to him what Lubavitch is doing. And although I personally come from liberal and so on and so forth, Orthodox, I say this is the most creative, probably the most energetic protoplasm that we have today within the Jewish community. Wonderful and so on and so forth. This man is calling the shot of life and death over something which he never met until 10 minutes ago when the memo came over his desk. He is deciding my fate. The fate of thousands of other Jews. All I can say is, Gewalt! Gewalt geschrien. God, heaven. What's it? It borders on the absurd, if not sheer lunacy. The absurd. Well, you see, I would say this to you. I don't want to go into the whole history of how this came about. This came about through a very interesting manner. We'd have to go through the whole problem of the Reformation, how the Reformation affected Jewish life, the disintegration of the kahal, the kehillah. I will say this to you. At one time, we used to have an organization called the kehillah, the commune. This is what Mordechai Kaplan keeps speaking about. In the commune, you had a synagogue. The synagogue was central to the entire Jewish community. It was the powerhouse, not the federation down on 1 South LaSalle. It was the synagogue. And they came together. People would come together, laymen, and also the rabbinic, so to speak, leadership. There were certain things that the laymen did, and there were certain things that the rabbinic leadership did. And as a matter of fact, if you want to have a real good feeling of what the kahal really looked like, if you want to find the pattern, I would say to you, look at the Catholic Church. As a matter of fact, the term used, as a matter of fact, in the Middle Ages, the term used for the head of the Jewish community, we have names such as the Archi-Synagogue, the head of the synagogue, the Exarchate, the Exarch, various names. He is also called the Archbishop. He is called Archbishop or Bishop of the Jews, yeah, Judenbischof. They called him the Jewish bishop. The best example of what a Jewish community looked like, the integrated Jewish community, you can see today vestigely left over. It's left in the Catholic Church. And that is where the bishop, or Cardinal Cody, calls the shots insofar as the allocation. If you're speaking about Catholicism, if you're speaking about the continuation of what? Of the municipality of Chicago, speak to Mayor Daley. But in terms of Catholicism, you speak to Cardinal Cody. I would like to see the day that conceivably, when you're speaking about the survival of Judaism within America, you speak to the rabbi who was involved in the survival of Judaism. As far as Jewishness is concerned, and here's where we make a distinction, between the survival of what we call the Judaic tradition, Judaism, this is the business of the rabbi. This is the business of the rabbinic leadership and so on. We work at it full time. In terms of Jewishness, that should remain Kashavanitchkes, Blintzes, Ayidische das, you know. That you can have the rest of the community working at that. We'll have Yiddish gift shops we'll turn over to them, you know, the local gift shop, a basketball court over here very shame, they'll wear with tzitzis, fine. But in terms of the tradition, that has to be turned over to the rabbi. So I say to you again, years ago there was a kehillah. The kehillah had, as appendages to it, old age homes, orphan asylums, charity, free kitchen, everything today that federation is in charge of, that has been sliced away, so to speak, from the synagogue or the religious community, everything that is administered by Geneva, you know, over there, with the social workers and so on, at one time came under the umbrella of the synagogue. In other words, religious, so to speak, religious functionaries called the shot. In the traditional kehillah, the lay people collected the funds, the lay people were out servicing the various things that had to be done, but it was the Beth Din, it was the rabbi who made the final decision. I don't know if you're aware of this. The rabbi made the final decision as to the disposition of certain things. He always went to the halacha. It's a wonderful article in the Jewish Encyclopedia, worth reading again, which I read periodically, and I read it again just last night. It was the rabbi, the Av Bezdin, who had himself a Shulchan Aruch, or he had a Rambam, you know, his Yeridea, his Choshen Mishpat, whatever he had, and he would call the shot. In the same way that Mr. Cody, in terms of allocation of this or allocation of that, he calls the shot. I say to you, I personally, there is a name that we use for this. It is called episcopacy. We used to call it, you see, these names sound Goyish. It almost sounds like I'm a Catholic speaking to you. Within our tradition, this episcopacy we used to call, or we still call, we call it Kabbalah, Mesorah. Kabbalah, Mesorah. It's a form of ordination or episcopal tradition. In terms of kehillah, the kehillah notion is again, has a Jewish root. And this is the word that they use over here locally within the Catholics. They call it diocese. The diocesan setup, the diocese. It is a diocesan setup. I've often maintained, you see, the tragedy in Jewish life today is that you have 50 little shulchalach all over. A fragmentation has taken place, and this is a very complex problem. But I've often said, when I was in New York, I would love to see the day that instead of a congregation saying, let another congregation form over there, no. To have a congregation right over here, and then to allow to form pilot satellite congregations in the area, with one main congregation as the head congregation, the Gemeinde congregation. So that you don't get a duplication of 5 libraries, and I'll give you what's happening up in Highland Park. Highland Park has 5 libraries that have duplicated 5 books. Then multiply that by hundreds, you can find 5 copies of probably 500 titles in every congregation in that area, you see. But not one full-time professional Jewish librarian. Not one. Not one library tells the other library what it's buying. So that means that we're all going to have 4,000 copies of Chad Gadya. But you cannot find in all of Highland Park, you can't find one set of the Rambam in Hebrew. I doubt if you can find, outside of my library, one set of Shas in Hebrew. They tell me it's at Bethel. I keep looking for it. Is it there? Somebody's office.
Maybe the new rabbi.
I doubt it. I had to go upright. I had to go out. I have to keep shuttling back and forth with the library downtown over here. So we don't have one major library. We don't have one centrally planned library. It's Hefker. Jeder eine macht Shabbos für sich. You see. Bedlam. It's bedlam. It's chaos. This is Jewish sociology, you see. And then, of course, we got so many Jewish presidents, you know. So, the word is, the children shouldn't understand, we can brechen, you see. We have an area situation. Everyone is now developing a Jewish museum. I'm probably going to be the next one to have a Jewish museum, so God should save me from that. We don't have one central curator, but we got 7 museums going. Der hat reingehabt a museum, and this one has a museum. Hefke. Bedlam. There are some serious things that are really lacking. So I have over here a number of things. I'm speaking to you now what I have over here. I had over here, for instance, I'll tell you, I am a professor at a Catholic university. I teach medieval history, and I'm at DePaul University. And I used to be at Lake Forest College. The rabbi didn't mention it. I used to be at Lake Forest College, and this was a very... I'm sorry, what? Huh?
No, I had neglected.
Yeah, no, it doesn't matter. I tell it for a purpose. Because I've had occasion to have intimate contact with churchmen, Catholics. I see Catholics, you know, they're just at my hand. Simple situation. It happens periodically. One of your congregants comes over to you and he says, Rabbi, I'd love to speak to you. Then you can speak to him. You speak to him for an hour. How long can you speak to him? Then chas v'shalom, if he says, I want to see you again tomorrow. You tell him, I got an invocation over there for the clothing industry. You know, or I got to make a meet. The answer is, the time that you give him is so limited. And this raises many, many problems. We have in our town, we have a librarian who periodically picks himself up, goes off to a monastery up in Lake Bluff. And there are, I forget what they are up there. I think they're Vincentians or whatever have you. You know, what kind of order there are. They're not, I don't know what they are. But there are brothers up there. He goes into this monastery, they give him a room. He remains there for 3-4 days. Comes down in the morning, has breakfast, so. I've said to the people in my community, you know, yet again, bigger and better shuls, you know, they can't get big enough. And with the libraries, I said, you know, what would happen, chas v'shalom, God forbid, if you have a layman, which is really what the problem really is. You have a layman who has a problem, personal problem. And he wants the time with the rabbi, and he finds that the rabbi can't see him. To see a man 3 days straight for 2 hours, and the man really needs your help. Or he'll go through a window. There's no place where a man, a layman, can really sit down and have the fellowship and the companionship of a rabbi for a half a day. So I suggested to someone, I said, you know, here is one of the wealthiest Jewish communities, rich, mit Geld, ooh, when they put appointments on doors, ooh, ah. You can't get them to think of getting together, buy a little retreat house somewhere, take one of the rabbis of the community, I call it a retreat house, take one of the rabbis of the community, see, and rotate them. So that a rabbi in a congregation has, let's say, once every 4 weeks, he must put in a weekend. Once every 4 weeks. And rotate it like that. Young people with personal problems. Young people who want to be near a rabbi. Young person comes home from school. It's a mish, it's a dilt, it's a bullshit. And I have to tell you, we're getting drug problems up there. Young kids who are searching for their way, you know, and this and that and the drug. We give so little service. We give everything of ourselves. There's no question about it. But in terms of actual personal service to individuals, there's absolutely no time. Because the fact of the matter is that everyone else is duplicating everyone else's work. That's really what it amounts to. We've got 5 social action committees in my community, 5 religious education, 5 adult education, you name them. Just name them. Then you try to write a little book or a little article. So, well, brings up another serious problem, of course, the division of labor. The division of labor. Within the Catholic Church, we have, for instance, in our community, we live in the same community, Father Murphy has 3 Catholic priests, 2 Catholic priests. One man will take care of that, another man will take care of that, and a third man will take care of you. You look at down at Harrington's church, there is now a youth counselor, a rabbi. Take, for instance, I could start, I have problems over here, I can go, this has to end at some hour. I can go on here for five years. Okay, a retreat house. Why can't a community set up a retreat house somewhere? Let the whole major Jewish community get a little retreat house. So all the rabbis, you know what this would mean? So Chas v'Shalom, if somebody feels a little that and the other, come up. I notice there are people who are getting up in years, have personal problems. How much time can the rabbi give them? So what do? Family service. We say you give family service, fine, you go down and then you find yourself speaking to a Puerto Rican girl. And that's really what happens, you know. Of course. Or a Schwarz Negro who really knows your problem very well because she's Schwarz Yiddish, Yiddish Schwarz, whatever that is, you know. Take a look at the Catholics, of course. And people wonder why people don't give money. So, who had the opportunity, the great privilege of dying in the arms of a rabbi lately? I know loads of people who die in the arms of nuns. Nuns? Service organization? Fantastic. Fantastic. You die in Michael Reese, you'll die in the hands of who? A Negro porter, you know, or something like that. Jewish hospital. But no Jews, just the doctors. You know. All the others. Okay, I mean, you see the problem? A retreat house, I said to them. I said to them in terms of a library. We have one library downtown, poor thing languishes, you know. It's another story. The answer, of course, is that we've been suffering from, at one time it was an excellent thing, but it's outlived its purpose. You see? Literally outlived. It's a period piece. It belongs to the Edwardian period, namely the proliferation of so many synagogues, providing essentially, or always being confronted with essentially the same problems, you see? And really what I'm saying is that congregations really, they are really aliens to each other. In my community, I've been there now for 10 years. I had to talk at we finally set up, thanks to the Rabbeinu Shalom, we set up a joint high school. The high school for the community high school, finally got lifted off the ground. Last week we had a meeting, we're starting to speak about joint adult education. We're getting a little static and flack, but maybe it'll happen. We're starting to speak about a joint Hebrew school. Because what has happened is this. You take a whole community like my community, we don't have one full-time professional Hebrew school principal, except for Louis Katzoff. And he's not a Hebrew school principal in that sense of the word. You know, he's a rabbi, ordained, he's an educator. Yes, he would be. North Shore? I don't think so. Solel, none. Everything under that is part-time. Just about. Everything is part-time. The reason, of course, being that no one congregation can supply enough time, enough hours, and so on, to pay full-time salaries. There are a few. Solel, I do, your place maybe 3 or 4. I don't have one. Solel, I know, doesn't have well, Mr. Birkin, everyone who's literally today teaching religious Hebrew school, religious school, Sunday school, any aspect of it is doing it for additional income. Every one of my Sunday school teaching is probably putting in a new sink in another room for which we need additional funds. That's her PIN money. It's PIN money Jewish education. Second job, fifth job. It's that or letter carrying. Again, a community not working. Hopefully, if we get an adult education program together, that's fine. That'll be good. For instance, in my community, the answer is it's been competitive. And I gave it a term. I said to them, everyone said, I called them, I said, we have over here, we don't have synagogues. We have cultic clubhouses. You can write it down. That's good. I invented it. I call them cultic clubhouses.
Sort of like kivas and Indian reservation.
Yeah, whatever they are. Each one. We have in ours, apparently in my community, I don't want to mention names, there is one group that regard themselves as full-blooded Iroquois. Ich bin a Blackfoot verschleppte Mandan. I'm a Mandan Indian. Verchjappet. I'm a bad relative. And they look down on us. Periodically, I think they bring care packages and leave them in front of my shul. You hear? Station identification. They are, they're the sophisticated, manicured, coiffured. They think that they're so perfect that they're no longer Jewish. They're white. They're passing. They're passing now as Watutsis. You see? Watutsis are in my community. In my community, Watutsis are in. Now, so I have over here, I'm going to say now quick things and then I'm going to let you speak. My library, problem, duplication ad nauseum. This was the thing that I mentioned. For instance, there is no union catalog. I called up my university library the other day. I needed a certain book. It's a German word book. I'm in medieval studies and so on. Historische, Deutsche, blah, blah, blah. It's historische Werkbuch, Hilfbuch, Mittelalter und Neuzeit. So they immediately go to a union catalog. Do you know a union catalog?
No,
Your librarian. So you know the story, huh?
Yeah.
They located one at the Newberry Library, the other one at the University of Chicago. They'll have it for me in 3 weeks. Today, if I was to ask someone, I'm looking for, let's say I'm looking for She'iltos der Rabbi Gon, or let's say something about that. I'm looking for the work of Chivi al-Balki. Who do you call? You call the College of Jews. I don't have it. Where can I get it? Maybe you should call Cincinnati. And if not Cincinnati, call Moshe Rav Kook in Tel Aviv. A bittere Gelechte. You know what I mean? Union catalog. No cross. You don't know where, what, was. And then the College of Jewish Studies, where I was there a couple of years back, has altogether, I think, 40,000 volumes. And the money that's been poured into Haggadahs for children. My place alone has 5 different kinds of Haggadahs. For kids who have only one Seder. If they would have 12, we lose money each year. Jeder eine noch a Haggadah. Well, it's serious business. These are terrible things.
The problem is, though, that most people regard librarians and libraries as, something you get a luxury, you get around to eventually, and it's, after all, most people don't consider librarianship a professional thing, so they let amateurs do it.
Well, librarianship today is becoming a very professional thing. The point of it is, my wife, incidentally, is a library woman. Now, I will say this to you. This is why I say to you, you say they.
Well,
That generation is passing. We have now today 80% of our young people are on university campuses. That's why I'm saying it's a new ballgame. Bereshis bara in the beginning there was creative, now they need Elohim. The intellectual, the ideational, the cultural. It's here. We are not prepared for our future. We are not prepared to meet our future. Our future are 80% of Jewish children who are coming off campuses. Tomorrow it's going to be 90% of Jewish children who are on campuses. And they want to see the librarians. And they want to see the scholars. And they want to see the professors who know. And what will we give them? We'll give them a huge building. Built by the Presses Union. Who knows? Built by business people. With high ceilings. With acoustical tile. And they'll be empty. It's like somebody said to me, girl said, she goes to Hillel house. So they said to the Hillel, to the people in the community, Hillel would like to have your interest and so on and so forth. They were asking one thing, the women brought in 5 couches. So the girl writes home a letter, she says, now at the Hillel house, she says, we have 8 couches on which nobody sits. 8 couches on which no one sits. And of course, why doesn't that the Hillel? It's another story. Again, problem over here. Okay, I want to go to something else now. Adult Jewish education, I spoke again, bedlam, competition, chaos. I said something else. I spoke, that's Jewish education. There is no Jewish education. It doesn't take place in temples. Wish that it would, but it's another problem. The retreat house that we can use. I have a number of things over here. One other thing I would say is this. There's an article that appeared in the Reconstruction. It's written by a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, Bernard Martin. And he speaks about college youth and the organized Jewish community. Last year, I taught a course at Lake Forest College on Judaism. I use this as an illustration. This course is offered once every 2 years. The year before mine, 2 years before mine, it was given by Doris Cole, the wife of the president, who was not Jewish. This was a small college, pressed for funds, and they could only give it once every 2 years, period. Long and short of it, I get through with my course, and I said to him, when the next time? He says, in 2 years. I said, can't it be given sooner? He says, we don't have the money. Moreover, the man who's in charge of this department is himself a minister. And why should he give time for Judaism? So he'd rather give another course in Christian philosophy and so on. The long and short of it was this. I said to him, what would happen if I were to speak to you? This is apropos of adult education. We have a load of Jewish adult education. You people are coming in and joining us on this and so forth. What happens if an allocation were taken, not only from this congregation, but from this, and B'nai Reuven, and B'nai Motel, and B'nai Zion, and B'nai Bobaville, and so on. And you get all together and you come over to Kendall College and you say to the people at Kendall, we would like to see a course in Judaism offered, and we have the personnel who will give it, the rabbis of the community. Would you like to accept our money? I think they'd be happy to do so. So I want to tell you something. This is to our advantage. The threshold of tolerance, for Jews is getting, the threshold or the tolerance is getting less and less and less. With the Yippie Hoffmans, with the Rubens, and so on and so forth, I think they've had it in this community a bit. And these are treacherous times. Treacherous times. I've always said this, that the line of survival, the survival lines in Jewish life are 2. Our survival. First, to transmit our values, our culture, our tradition, our customs to our children. And the next one is to build the dike out there. That dike that's going to hold back, God forbid, whatever kind of garbage is behind that wall. That dike over there is the line of education, and the crucial time is those 4 years, when Gentile and black and pink and yellow and Catholic and Presbyterian has to go to college. They are tomorrow's leader. They are the elite protoplasm. And there they are exposed. This is the 4-year period in which they are exposed. Some of them have never seen Jews. Some of them will never see a Jew again after they're through. I can tell you stories that I've had. I had a young man up in one of my classes, Lake Forest. Let me just get through that. Maybe I'll tell you about my young man in my class. They have an exposure for 4 years. There is a great curiosity in Judaism. I'm speaking about the non-Jew. In my classes, 99% of my students are Catholics. I see maybe 2 to 3 Jews each semester. I'm speaking to 100 Goyim each week. And I don't say this for the record, but although my course is medieval Europe, it's medieval Europe as seen through the eyes of Kazrilevke. They don't know it. It's medieval Europe as seen through the eyes of a Jew. It's really medieval Jewish history. Not really. No. They're very serious. They became very serious. What's up? Perpetrating fraud. I give them what they need. It's Mainster. Otherwise they don't pass. There's no question about it, you see. in the lectures and so on, there are questions. For instance, in one of my classes, I teach Martin Buber. So humanities course. Martin Buber. I have, for instance, in one of my classes, a Mr. Conway, who's now reading up on the kibbutz. Works for IBM. What's that about? My brother-in-law works for IBM. My brother-in-law works for him. The point of it is this. This is a rare opportunity for young people, from the side of the young people, to get to know something about Jews and Judaism. There are kids who have never seen a Jew in their lives. It is also a wonderful opportunity for us Jews to really build bridges into that community. These people are going to determine our fate and destiny tomorrow. So I say the first lifeline is what we do within our own community. The second line of defense, really line of defense, is what happens in that community. And the best time, the only critical time to get them, is when they must open up. They have to have the exposure. They're 4 years in college. I have experience, and you can't imagine what the dimension is. I taught at Lake Forest College, and I had a young man in my class. A very interesting episode. At the end of my class, I was teaching Middle Ages. I told him that the Middle Ages died hard, and that there was actually jousting and so on and so forth way up into the 15th century, 16th century. And then I said it was something like the Roaring Twenties. The Roaring Twenties out of Newport, Rhode Island, didn't die until the 30s, 40s, and 50s. But they never let the other community know what was going on. They were still yachting, getrunken. They owned America. Roaring 20s went right through the Depression. And I said, you know, and that's the way the Rockefellers, the Morgans, that's the way they live. All of a sudden, as soon as I conclude with the Rockefeller, a little kidder goes up in class. I said, what's so funny? It was the last day of class. Nothing. After class is over, I walk over to someone, I said to him, what's so funny? He says to me, no, he says, Dr. Singer, he said, you mentioned Rockefeller's Morgan. He says, we have a Morgan in our class. He says, a Morgan. I said, so immediately I do my calculation on Morgan. Yeah, it's like Tantes, Bubbas, Chanisara, you know, was a dishwasher and a place. Morgan. As a matter of fact, we have a very prominent family in Highland Park by the name of Morgan, except that his first name is Chatzkela. He changed it from Morganovich to Morgan. So, in order to play it doubly safe, I walk over to this young kid. His name is Junius, lovely boy, and I didn't want to feel, you know, that I offended him. I said to him, Junius, I said, I hope what I said didn't offend you. He said, no, Dr. Singh. He said, not at all. I said, I hear that you're a Morgan. He says, yes, I am. I says, tell me how. You know, how? He says, well, he says, my great-grandfather was J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan. This boy, when he turns 21, I assure you, there will be 6 banks in Iowa that are going to change ownership as the result of a codicil that's laying in the Chase National Bank in New York. And this kid will probably become the owner of all 6. His mother was a Vanderbilt. See? It was the first time he came from schools up in Vermont. He came from the schools where, I don't have to tell you, you know, we've infiltrated Groton and so on, and you know, we've infiltrated. He came from a place where he never saw any. This was the first time in his life that he had been exposed to Jews. And I dare say, like I told my board later on, if his Zaidi, I always remember a picture of his great Zaidi with a stick, shaking it, you hear, at the director of the Metropolitan Opera House. You hear? Straschet. He was Straschen. And he had this bulbous nose, I think, from martinis. You could see the olive. I said, sein Zaidi wohl gewusst. If his great-grandfather was to know that Shalom Singer, the Rebbe, was his teacher, he would have flipped 9 times doing pirouettes dort nach dem Beis Olam, you see. But the answer is, the point that I make is this. This is what has happened within the community. Namely, the homogenization, the volatility that goes on. And this, while it's bad for his Zaidi, a Zachenvei that he is, for us, it's wonderful. He came to me, I'll never forget it, comes to me a couple of months later, I meet him on the street again. He says to me, there is a movie that you must see, Dr. Singh. I said, what is it? Never on Sunday. He saw this Jewish film, never on Saturday. Never on Saturday. He said, delightful, never on Shabbos. Yeah, he said it was delightful, delightful. And you'd be amazed at the young people that you steer here, there, and yonder It's amazing, and this is the only opportunity we have. Hopefully it will help. I say this. I told this to my community. I said, I believe that the time has come for every synagogue to take a portion of their adult education money, pool it with others, walk over to a local college, instead of waiting for Rosary to invite Manfred Harris, waiting. You come over and you say to them, here is the money and we have the man for you. They had to take Manfred Harris out of circulation in the whole Jewish community. Okay. This is what happened. You come over and you say to them, I told the man at Lake Forest, I said, what happens if we come up with this? He said, I'd be delighted. I'd love to give a course in Judaism, and then Jewish philosophy, and then Bible, taught by, not necessarily me, let them hear a conservative viewpoint, an orthodox. This should be an assessment of every congregation. What he says over here, Bernie Martin, he says the time has come for the Federation to take that money that goes to Michael Reese and all over, to take that money and start to set up chairs, to subsidize chairs. Incidentally, if you're interested, the Abba Hillel Silver Chair in Cleveland is subsidized by the Cleveland Federation, in part, also by the Temple, Abba Hillel Silver's congregation. This is the only chair of its kind that is subsidized by Federation. Lake Forest can use them, and look what happened at the University of Chicago. The University of Chicago has received millions. Pritzker, 10 million. You know how many Jewish scholars there are there? 2 that are interested in Jewish studies, neither of them with Judaism. Galb teaches medieval something or other, Jewish history, and Gewirtz teaches, but no one teaching Judaism. I'm speaking about a, beg pardon? Grablovsky is the U of C. He's in sociology. But not teaching Judaism. They've never had anyone teach Judaism, except for Kaufman Kohler, but Emil G. Hirsch, who never taught Judaism. I'm speaking about a chair in Jewish philosophy, Jewish studies, manned by, not necessarily a tzaddik or a rabbi, manned by a man, and this is very important. The young people are interested, because let me tell you this, and this is the klal gadol. The young people breaking out of American culture are telling you that there is breakdown within American culture. Remember that. When canaries start to flee a mine, more important than canaries who are flying away is a mine that's collapsing. That's what it tells you. When you break out of something, it tells you that there is breakdown within something. These kids who say, stop America or stop the world, I want to get off, they are rejecting the value system of America, and they are looking for alternate routes. Judaism unquestionably has something to say to them. As an alternate, absolutely. I have young kids as a result of my class up at Lake Forest College. They keep coming to my services. Going. I had one boy, I'll never forget it. I mentioned him with great affection. I came into the class, like a devil's advocate. He walked over to me one day and he said, I'm becoming a rabbi in spite of you. Can you imagine? Absolutely true. I don't want to tell you what else he said. He said, in spite of you. I said, listen, like the good rabbi said, if not mishum avos yitzchak, if he becomes a rabbi not because of love of me, let it be because of hate of me. But as long as he becomes a rabbi, he'll make a good rabbi. So, I mentioned that for the record. College education, very, very important. Today our operation is Chautauqua societies, or whether it's the USO, the United Synagogue. We take a rabbi and they tell the college, we'll pay the rabbi a fee, let him speak to the kinderlach. And they have really, it doesn't mean anything. First of all, it doesn't have the status. The rabbi comes in as a carpetbagger, just as much as a little minister would come in. We're from Jehovah's Witness. Can we open up our sample box? Modern the samples. A one-shot, contempt. What they need is, they have to see Judaism, or I say Judaism, Jewish philosophy, or Jewish ethics, Jewish thought, whatever have you, whatever you want to call it. It has to be put on a par, on a level with history, philosophy, psychology, chemistry, etc., etc. This is the failure of course, the Hillel House. Why should a kid have to go to Hillel House, which is like, it's a plant, a plant. where they have to listen to a rabbi, and the rabbi doesn't have the same status, unfortunately. Doesn't have the same kind of status, same kind of prestige. You don't even get credit for it. They should, and they have a load of work to do with their own coursework. But not only that, it's this is the problem of adult education. People are not really getting to do things as such. But that's another problem. I had my course in Judaism in Lake Forest. Everyone who teaches Buba gives them I and thou. I and thou you can give if you're a Methodist, Episcopalian, Baptist, Chinaman. Because the I and thou is so parav, it is so parav, neutral. See? I force the kids to read Israel in the World, where he goes to tasks, he gives it, he takes it on, takes on Christianity, takes on the contemporary world, speaks about the kibbutz, speaks about the Jewish experience, what it means, chosenness, and so on and so forth, which of course no one would assign children. Only a Jew would assign it. And it's been very gratifying. The kids for the first time read it, they said, this is Buba? This is Buba. I said, this is not Buba, it's Judaism. Finest articulation of the faith to be found anywhere. All right, I say retreat. I said something else, for instance. My congregation, I believe that the time has come for congregations. I got to have you people speak to me. In the ancient world, also in the medieval world, they had what they call a scriptoria. The scriptoria, instead of just a library, the scriptoria was a place where you would write transcribed manuscripts. The greatest one, of course, is Cassiodorus, Vivarium, 527, thereabouts. What he would do was, and what goes on the scriptorium, I don't think it is 527, 540, 540. What they do with this, it was creativity. Today, for instance, I had to do as my work, I did my doctoral thesis, happened to be, I worked at the University of Chicago, and my doctoral thesis was in medieval mysticism and medieval history. And I did, as a matter of fact, because of Abe Duker, because Abe Duker was here, he said to me, Shalom, he said, Rachmanis. I was interested in William of Aquitaine. I was interested in other things. He said to me, Shalom, he says, I ask you as a favor. We have so few people working in Judaica. What do we got? 3 yeshivas? Jewish Theological Seminary, Hebrew Union College, and then JTS. What else is there? Who else is writing? Catholics have seminaries? Ad infinitum. Over here, McCormick, Garrick, and a couple of dozen others, who knows? Meadville, the whole federated. Sheer. We have 3 measly institutions. Out of my own place, nobody has written in the last 10 years. He said to me, writing something Jewish. I said, what is that? He said, Sefer Hasidim, a classic that needs translating. Our own classics. We got 50 Haggadahs, but our children are deprived, because of the lack of translation, of some of the great classics of our period. By the time the Yale Judaica series gets through publishing this stuff, it will be Zadis. I don't see why a congregation doesn't assume as an obligation, like I said before, commission. Congregation of this size, rich, should commission young scholars, young fellows who are going to give their life kishkes to write about Herman Melville and to write about I Love Virginia Woolf. You put up a prize, money. We'll pay $1,000 for the translation, and they love money nowadays, I hear. People like money, I'm told. If every congregation were to do this, you'd have classics coming out of your ears, where my young people ask, what can I read? And it's the same Zelda Kazakh for the last 20 years. Basic Judaism by Milton Steinberg. Basic Judaism, Milton Steinberg. Jewish history. Bird's eye view or Sacker. Is Gate von Gogol. You could drop dead. I'm embarrassed. I'm humiliated. There's no track literature. Young people want to know, what is Judaism saying about what? I said, we're publishing Aggadas. We're great in Aggadas. Aggadas. You need Aggadah? We're long in Aggadas. Aggadas and prayer books. We make prayer books. God forbid. Well, I don't know what else. And then also wonderful children's stuff. Fanny Fegele makes little bodies for the kiddies. You see the problem? See the problem? So I have a gentleman in my congregation. I was asked, for instance, recently, there is no history of Jewish literature. The Waxman history of Jewish literature is non-existent. It's not for real. It's not a history. It's an annal. It's a compendium. Lists 5,000 books. That's it. But interpretive, we do have the classic. It exists. It's written by Eitzenberg, and it's called the Historische Jüdische Literatur. It's in 9 volumes. It sits in Yiddish. There are 2 people translating it today. A Jewish tailor, who's retired, and me. In addition to being a rabbi, you see, and carrying other duties. Geval! Bescheid Geval! Why should this be? And it's classic. It is a classic. Because it's really not a history of Jewish literature, it's a history of Judaism. My book, no one would publish it. It's being published now because one man is dedicated. He believes in Jewish survival. But the Gechapt Rachmanis, and he said, we'll have to publish it. It's worthwhile publishing. I just looked over some of my work, some of my correspondence yesterday. I once sent a little article to Cecil Roth. A little article I wrote on the expulsion of the Jews in 1290, a little small little thing. It's been read already by at least 3 people. Me, the typesetter, and I think another guy who slipped on it. You know. He writes me a letter, and I wrote him in my note when I sent my article. I know he works in Anglo-Jewish history. I sent him a note that I was working in Sefer Hasidim. He writes back a letter from Yerushalayim. He was in Israel. He says, I am glad to hear that at long last somebody has devoted himself to that remarkable, precious book, Sefer Hasidim. Nobody's in. Now, of course, it's being done. I just discovered Rutledge Keaton Paul in England, as I was coming through, is also doing translations. They want me to do me. When I say me, they would like to have him and others do. Rabbis. We're thinking of sending out a questionnaire to rabbis all over the United States. Will they devote some time to translating the text? Doesn't require any great engineering. But to free the rabbis from all the other garbage. Young people are here, they're searching for answers. They want to know the relevance of Judaism and so on and so forth. We have nothing to give to them. Just nothing. Some of the greats. Steinberg died. Of course, they murdered him. Man died, 46 years old. Promising career. Killed him. He was knocking up mezuzahs on houses all day long. Well, tragically, huh? I can tell you more. Another thing. Okay, I'm going to just complete over here. In terms of congregations, I would say this to you, an ailing faith. These are all my things. I once did this little rundown. There are 10,000 ministers for 2 million Presbyterians. There is 1 minister for 250 families, so to speak, 250 members, I should say, individuals in the Presbyterian denomination. There are 26,000 ministers for 9 million Methodists, 1 for every 350 members. There are 250,000 nuns and priests for 35 million Catholics. It works out to about 1 per 125 Catholic. There are 3,000 rabbis for 5 million Jews. It works out 1 rabbi for 1,700 Jews. So in other words, if they should all affiliate tomorrow, which I think the Rabbeinu Shalom will not allow, 1 per 1,700. That's the way it breaks down over here. 3,000 rabbis for 5 million Jews. Huh?
Is that all rabbis are
In America.
That's what it is. Yeah. Unless you want to include Presbyterians. 3,000. I don't even think there are 3,000 really. No. There are 700 Reform. How many Conservative?
Approximately members of the Rabbinical Assembly of almost 900, but they're not all active.
Yes. So 97 is how much?
So you also say about 750.
16.
And
the other side I'm giving
approximately the same thing.
so for all total of
About 25.
Of course. The other thing I would say is this. I noticed, for instance, you take, for instance, here is a rich, tremendously wealthy community, Jewish community. We're wondering, where are the Jewish this and Jewish that? I said years ago, why can't we have a Tanglewood? B'nai B'rith, Why don't we have a Tanglewood where you bring together, period of a month or 2, you subsidize them, you bring them in just so the government has Fulbrights. Years ago in our Jewish community, we used to have Kest. A boy would come, let's say, from Chipachok, and he would go away 400 miles to a yeshiva in Tel Slabot Gemir. The people who lived in the environment of Slabot Gemir were assigned a young student that they had to give bread and lodging, food and lodging. Gave him a fellowship, a subsidy. I don't see any Tanglewoods in Jewish life. We're poets, musicians, Jewish playwrights, Jewish cinematographic, what's the word? I had my stroke. Cinematic? Cinema? Oh, you both had yours. Where people working on stage settings could meet and get together. Bring them all together. Maybe we'll get another Gottweiswas, another Dybbuk from them. Place doesn't exist. What does exist is, like he tells me, we just closed Camp Surah. No money for Camp Surah, not even for kids. So Federation decided to close that down so that we can continue over there with our contributions to Michael Reese, so on and so forth. So Camp Surah closes. A Jewish Tanglewood. You understand? How does it sound to you? Delightful, of course delightful. Where do Jewish people go, who have a little aspiration or something? Where do we force our people to go? Like I said about the retreat house. We don't have a retreat house. Tanglewood, Hutmanish. So where do we go? They go to Las Vegas. Miami Beach. Not the Miami down on the side where my mother lives, God bless her and so on. Hey, Miami, go to Duval, Toulouse, Flesh Pots, Fountain Blues, Fountain Purples. I don't even speak about day schools. I think the time has come, for instance, for synagogues to become involved in senior citizen homes. I would like to see them take over, personally, I would like to see them take over hospitals on an individual basis, so on and so forth. Local communities or whatever. That would be, of course, more complex, we would get into. But today the government is supporting everything anyway. You know what I mean? So, I'm going to stop over here and now have you ask questions and then we'll speak on. I had some other things over here about a chaver. You see, years ago, in the old Kehillah, I'm going to conclude with this, the rabbi was released from a great deal of work. Why? Because in the classic Jewish community, when you look into the Catholic, if you want to know what your classical synagogue looked like in ancient times, I say to you, look at the Catholic Church. All of these terms, presbyteria, diaconus, archiepiscopoi, all of these were names for Jewish functionaries in the 1st, 2nd century of this era, later taken over by the Catholics. We had a gizbor, man who took care of the charity. We had the chazan. There were two kinds of chazans. We had shamas, the shamas. We had the rav. We had a moil. Right? We had a shochet. These were all functionaries. They were religious functionaries. Where are they today? Everything now falls on top of the rabbi. Whether it's Keren Ami, or taking funds to give. The shochet isn't here. The moil isn't here. They're all gone. The priests, on the other hand, priests not only their other priests usually assisting them, they have nuns. My community, we have 24 nuns who sit in the Loretto house. 24 nuns, full time. In addition, as you probably don't know, they have within the Catholic denominations what we call tertiaries. These are the brothers, lay brothers. I have one of my classes. I teach 2 nuns. I have 1 brother. Periodically I get priests coming through. He's a lay brother. He doesn't take orders as such, but he's always a functionary. He's a classical shamus. We have, all of these things have been stripped off the synagogue. The rabbi doesn't have access to this. So literally what we're doing is, we're literally pulverizing the rabbi. He's paper mache. You're making out of him gehackte leather. This is why, incidentally, so very little gets worked. The rabbi is a functionary. He has not really been freed for his classic objectives and goals, his classic determination, and that is to teach. And today, more than ever before, the fate of our people is going to be decided. It's going to be decided in a schoolroom, in a classroom, not in the administrator's office. Sociology, like I say again, the youngsters are being repelled by sociology. What's going on, what the show represents to them. They will only be attracted back in by really, I believe, a kind of theology, what we have to offer them, and we have an awful lot to offer them. But the rabbis have to be in a position to offer them. I'm going to conclude over here, then I'll say my other things, and let me now take some questions, if that's it.
Why don't, first of all, I want to thank Rabbi Singer for, as I think you will agree with me, a very interesting and unique presentation which he and he alone can do in his own inimitable manner. And for that, as well as for the food for thought which you gave us, Rabbi Singer, we thank you very much. I might put in a plug just at this point before we go to the questions, particularly the point about the translation of the classics, the Musar literature.
Yeah.
You had the Sefer Hasidim.
Rabbi
Cohen
Yes.
has just
Oh, yes.
completed his work. It's already been printed. A few sample copies have been sent via air freight. The rest are coming on the slow boat. But they're here, the Orchos Tzadikim, the ways of the righteous, which is precisely what
Yes,
you are referring to.
I'm very glad that he mentions that. You're very fortunate. Your rabbi, as a matter of fact, showed me in Amsterdam the galleys for the book that's being published. I told him, I said to him, Seymour, I'm just delighted and happy. I'm thrilled. You know, the rabbi, of course, he's a rabbi of a cathedral congregation. This is one of the major congregations in the city, if not in the country. Not only did he find time, he made time, realizing how important all this is. He made time to translate. It's a lot of time about these things. But it takes dedication. Yeah.
I think why don't we'll allow Rabbi Singer to
Yes.
kind of call on
Yes,
everyone.
Well, I'm a little disturbed.
A little.
Well, I feel so many of us of my generation bring our children to a synagogue. The education in the synagogue is one area that we as lay people do not touch, other than at the request of the rabbi or at the request of the administrative people. And I can only speak of this synagogue, which I'm sure is like most synagogues.
Yeah.
There is no penny spared in this synagogue for education of the children.
Yeah.
Yet I'm sure our children have the same problems when they get into college, the same rejection or rebellion that
Yes,
you're
of course.
talking about.
Yes.
Where does the problem lie? Is it in the very it seems to me it has to be, our kids can't read the translations or meet the problems of the college existence and the college attacks unless they have the very beginnings to support them. We try to give them that. We as parents.
Yes,
I'm
we
talking
do.
about the lay
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
So where's the breakdown?
Well, I'll tell you what it is. Here is what's happening. You're getting into an area which is I'm glad you asked it, and it's a little complex. Not really that complex. A child, we banked for many years, as did Catholics and others. Give me the child until he's 6, till he's 9 or 11, and then you can have him. That used to be absolutely true. You know why? Not very much happened intellectually after 11 or 15. Simple as that. Boy, we go, my father went to the 3B, 7B. How far did your father go to school?
8th grade.
That's right. That's right. Beyond that point, there was no further development or maturity or intellectual activity going on. The same person today, the Catholic Church today doesn't say any longer, give me the kid until he's 11. As a matter of fact, everyone is saying today, I want to get back at him from 18 to 22. Now again, precisely to your question, and we don't want to elude it because this has to be said, this is the way I see it. When you had a youngster in school, you got from him a wonderful loyalty, a kind of childlike, almost childish kind of commitment to Yiddishkeit. Chanukah, and I remember Simchas Torah, we used to go around, and Sukkot was... That remained with him for the rest of his life. Later on, that was fine. For generations and generations, this was fine. We didn't have to compete with foreign ideology, so to speak. Our kids were then not delivered into a marketplace of ideas. This is what you saw in this. It's like saying, why is it today all of a sudden they're going towards non-Jewish women? The answer is years ago. You were brought up in a community. You lived in a ghetto. You saw a shiksa. She used to put out the electric Friday night. But today, when you're throwing kids together into a cauldron, 18 to 22, and when he's one Jew in a population of so many thousands and thousands, it's a different ballgame. Then you ask me, what has happened? What broke down? The answer is, he's one. Lake Forest College has 1,100 students. out of that whole group, the largest single majority was the Jewish. That is after Presbyterians. How many were there? 150 Jewish kids. 150 Jewish. In 1100. Now take some of the other places. Take places like Colorado. My boy's going to go off to Gottweiswas. He's going off to, what did we call it?
You had a special name. I prefer that you...
Yeah, it's, well, the place, the larger locale is called Golemville. It's named after the Golem. No, it's a school for advanced retardation for the gifted. Yeah, I wear now things, support the morally handicapped. You understand what I'm saying? Let me get through. My boy will have to go into an environment. He'll probably be Gottweiswas, maybe they'll have maybe 500 Jews in 50,000. Yeah. Again, so there was a period where you could put in a wonderful empathetic feeling in a child for Yiddishkeit. It remained with him lo'elam v'olam. Remained with him permanently. Today, we're beginning to realize that something happens beyond the kid getting bar mitzvah, and after he's even confirmed. We put him back into a school where everything that he put in over here empathetically is attacked. Not here, but here. Here. They don't question his feelings. They just question his mind. In other words, the attack is not, so to speak, viscerally. It's not a kishka attack. It's a cerebral attack. Question now is, what did you do for him cerebrally? Nothing. You did nothing for him. You let him out when he was 13. 16, he read the 5th Haggadah, and you let him out. Then when he gets into a class in philosophy at age 18, that's the time when he should have a course in Judaism. All of a sudden he discovers anthropology, comparative religion, and then where's the Jewish book? It's not that we've shortchanged him. We haven't kept pace with him. We haven't shortchanged him. He got through at 16. Now I'm saying extend his education to 22.
Well, that happens the same with the Catholic kids.
Of course it happens to the Catholic kids. You know what kind of tsaros they're in?
Oh, well.
Of course, of course. The point of it is, one rabbi has called it the disaster area. From 18 to 22, all the hatches that you've tacked down all your life are opened. It's a highly competitive situation. What's that actually?
I just have to be excused. Continue on.
Oh. What are you doing? You ending it?
No.
Oh.
This, go ahead.
It's still going. Fantastic, without electric. What is on bulbs? He's cutting off my air.
Spiritual power.
So, do you understand what's happened?
Didn't know
You understand?
This is another kind of power.
Right. So again, dear, all of the empathetic, this is like saying, I loved my mother, and there was that. Then all of a sudden, you get him in college, you say, but let's question, what is this thing, mother?